Welcome to Objects of Desire,
the podcast in which we talk about the things that mean the most to us.
or tell us who we are, where we came from, or where we're heading. I'm Tony Freund.
And I'm Naz Nazawa.
Every episode, we invite a guest to share the stories behind their one special thing, valued not for its price tag, but for its beauty, craftsmanship, quirkiness, and especially for the ways it connects them to the world.
And today, we are joined by Elizabeth Gilbert, the best-selling author of Eat, Pray, Love, The Last American Man, Big Magic, The Signature of All Things, and her latest memoir, The Extremely Vulnerable, All the Way to the River.
Liz burst onto the literary scene in 1997 with the debut collection of short stories, Pilgrims. Today, she will talk about beloved collage portrait of a famous poet created by a longtime friend.
We are so excited to have her here with us today to discuss her object of desire.
Elizabeth Gilbert, we are so thrilled to have you with us today on Objects of Desire. Thank you for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. Thanks for the warm welcome.
It's a cold day. What more can we do than warmly welcome our guests? And you're not here with us, alas, but you are in your home across the river, as the New Yorker magazine would, which means you could be anywhere.
Anywhere, really.
Yeah.
Anywhere on earth, actually.
Yes, but you're here today. We asked you to sort of talk about something special, bring something special, and you're the trailblazer because you're actually posed with it hanging behind you. So why don't you tell us about it?
I know, we have a visual aid. I'm sorry for those who are listening that they can't see it, but I live in an old church in rural New Jersey, and the church was built in 1794 and has had many, many caretakers and stewards over the years. And I've had it for 20 years now, which is incredible for me because I don't tend to keep things. So that's a long time for me to have possession of anything, person, place, or thing. And it's got these giant 16-foot windows, the original windows, and between them, hanging right behind me, is this work of art, this collage that my late friend, the artist John Morse, created of Emily Dickinson. It's the famous full-on face portrait of Emily Dickinson that he recreated from collage that he found, garbage that he found on the streets of Atlanta. There's something very touching about this at this moment, because when you and I first discussed, Tony, when you reached out to me and asked me if I would do this, that was immediately the piece of art I wanted to talk about. And then shortly after that, John died. So as we talk about this work today, I'm also talking about my friend who died a month ago and who was my friend for decades. And so it's especially touching for me to be able to talk about him and his work and this incredible collage.
That's amazing. And I mean, I'm so sorry to hear that, but I think it also adds a layer to our conversation about how the things we live with actually keep us connected to the people that we love. So
thank you.
I love it. Did he create it for you, or had you seen it? And
no,
are you an Emily Dickinson fangirl?
I'm more of a John Morse fangirl than I am an Emily Dickinson fangirl. I love Emily Dickinson, I think, as we all do and should, but I would hardly call myself a connoisseur of her work, although I can give you a very fun fact about Emily Dickinson that you may not know, which is that every one of her poems can be sung to the tune of The Yellow Rose of Texas. Because I would not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. Anyway, that's just a fun trick that you can do with, and I'm sure people who understand poetry can tell you why that is, what it is about the meter of her poems.
Right.
But
I was going to ask you to hold the singing, and we would offer that as bonus material, but you give it away for free up front.
You can't make me not sing.
Not sing.
No, so John didn't make this for me, but one of the reasons that I love this piece of art is because of how much it reminds me of him and our friendship and who we were then and who we became. And you are part of this story, actually, Tony. That's what made it also make me want to talk about this piece of work.
Oh my gosh.
I met John in March of 1993, and I was bartending. And I was bartending at a bar called No Idea. And it was after I had stopped being a bartender at the Coyote Ugly Saloon. And it was a very different kind of bar. It was a more staid, as most bars are, from the Coyote Ugly Saloon. And I was an aspiring writer. and I had not had anything published yet, although I was trying. And those were the years, Tony, when you were working at Esquire and I was sending you my short stories and you were writing me wonderful rejection letters saying, not quite this. We like it, but not quite this. And I always felt like I was so close. I just wanted to have one thing published. And it was the night before St. Patrick's Day.
Mm-hmm.
And in came my friend, my future friend, John, and my future friend, Dirk. You know, you never know who you're going to meet. I love this expression that says you have not yet met all the people you're going to love. And when I went to work that night, I did not know that I had not yet met all the people I was going to love. And they walked into the bar and John sat down and he flashed me with the sign of a V. And he said, "Do you have any drinks served in glasses shaped like this?" So the very first thing was like about shape, right? And then he could see that I was a little perplexed. And then he said, "I'm looking for something that begins with an M and ends with a teeny." And it was the most charming introduction. And they stayed all night. I talked to them all night. I ignored my other customers completely. And we talked about everything. And then John said, "I've got to go to bed because tomorrow is the St. Patrick's Day parade. And I'm going to be protesting with a bunch of other gay people because the Archbishop of New York won't let gay Irish people march in the parade. And we're meeting before dawn at the New York steps of the New York Public Library." And I said, I'll meet you there. And it was just obvious that that's what the next thing to do was, even though I was working till 2 or 3 in the morning. I got up in the morning and I set my alarm and I went and I ran into him and he was like, "The bartender?" I was like, "Our bartender from last night, you actually came?" And I said, "Yeah, I wanted to support you." And that sealed our friendship. And he always told that story. He's like, "She just showed up. She said she was going to show up and support us." And she did. And we did our protest march and then we went and had coffee. I remember my feet were freezing and I was tired, but we became such good friends after that. And the part that involves you is that several months later, he came in and it was November of 1993. And behind the bar, I had a copy of the Esquire magazine that was my first publication ever that you had found and edited and discovered me. And I showed it to him and he said, "Will you sign this and give this to me?" And it was the only copy I had at that point. It was so precious, but he said, "I just want to remember this night forever that I got to meet you before this and then see you at the moment where your career began." And he said, "I'm also an artist." And we became like artist friends after that. You know, before that we had been like bar friends, but he didn't know really that I was a writer and I didn't know really that he was an artist. And that's how we met. His widower now has a signed copy of that issue of Esquire with Michael Jordan on the cover that you created for me. So
that's right.
It all circles around to this moment.
And then did we give you another copy for your
You gave
own?
me
Do you have a few
lots
copies
of
of those?
You sent me a whole box of them that I still have a lot of them in my attic.
Amazing. Oh, that's so beautiful. I love that. So he has your first copy of your first published story. And then was this Emily Dickinson portrait a gift that came many years later, or?
Many years later. I had been, he'd been giving me his art for years. We'd been exchanging and giving art for a really long time. And John was a pure artist, which is why I also wanted to celebrate his work, even before I knew that he was going to be gone by the time we had this conversation. Yeah. He never wasn't making art, and he never wasn't making public art, and he never wasn't making witty things out of found objects. And he always had to have a day job for most of his life. And he always had a day job. I had a day job for most of my career until Eat, Pray, Love. And I celebrate all artists who have day jobs and who make art. One of the cherished things that he gave me very early on was a threefold pamphlet that he had made with exacting precision, and this was before you could make things easily online, that looked like an educational government pamphlet or a medical pamphlet that said "pigeons, friends or foe." And it was all these drawings of pigeons and descriptions of like the size of pigeon's brain compared to watch battery and like the amount of vermin that pigeons contain. It was so great. And one of my other favorite pieces of art that I had was, you know how in New York City for years people would put, and they still do, like a sheet of paper of something that's for sale, and then they'd have little slips of paper and you could rip off little pieces of the slips of paper with the phone number.
Yeah.
And it was
Like the
often about
fringy bottom.
man with a van, or like guitar lessons. And they often said moving. So he wrote one that just said moving, very moving, and then wrote little haikus and put them on the pieces of paper that people could rip off and hung them out all over the city, and people could tear off a very moving little haiku and take it home. So, but he started doing collages kind of later in life, and I bought this piece in 2011, and it was a celebration for me of my own success that I was able. He was making work on a bigger scale. He was making work that was expensive, and that because of the great success of Eat, Pray, Love, I was able to buy it, and I put it originally in an apartment in New York that I bought with the proceeds of the money from the Eat, Pray, Love movie. And the reason I love it so much, it's so colorful, and it's so beautiful. And anybody who knows that portrait of Emily Dickinson instantly recognizes it as her. And it's made out of garbage, and it's gorgeous. And I feel like John and I both came from backgrounds where we weren't expected to grow up and be artists. I came from a background where my parents were Christmas tree farmers, and he came from a blue-collar background in Lake City, Florida. And I don't know, sometimes I feel like we made ourselves out of garbage. Like we found materials and we pasted them together and we made art. So it was a celebration of a lot for me to be able to buy that work and support him. And I mean, all we did our whole lives was support each other. He came to my very first reading with a giant bouquet of flowers at the KGB bar in the Lower East Side. Like, we never didn't show up for each other as art friends.
That's wonderful. Was this the one piece that like really got you from that body of work? Or because I've seen a few other portraits, they're all so cool and all,
Were they incredible?
Yeah, I really the Einstein one in particular really got me.
The Einstein one is amazing. The Barack Obama one is amazing.
Yeah.
The Martin Luther King Jr. one is incredible. He was doing icons. He's got, there's one, the last one I saw him working on, I went to visit him in Maine a couple years ago. Oh, this is what's going to make me cry. I had the most wonderful night. I don't drink anymore. John still enjoyed things that began with an M and end with a teeny. But we stayed up all night, and he was drinking, and he was happily, warmly drunk. And I said, I got to go to bed. And I just remember him saying, please don't go to bed. Like, please, like, just stay a little while longer. I feel that right now, like, oh, I wish I just stayed up another hour, because I didn't know that was the last time I was ever going to see him. But he had an unfinished piece of work at that point that he was working on of Mick Jagger that was amazing, and I think it's only in black and white, and it's a bit of a departure from some of the other. He did an incredible David Bowie one, so he was making these pieces. These are not good at size, but this is a pretty giant piece of art, and he was making these larger than life pieces of work that were about larger than life characters. And he was also larger than life. I mean, John was a legend. He's one of the many people I know. Rhea, my ex-partner, was another one who, there were people who were like such stars that when they walk into the room, they just have so much charisma that you're like, is this person tremendously famous? They should be, because they're so charismatic. And John had that level of charisma too. He was also quite larger than life.
So these larger than life characters, yet rendered in garbage. I mean, it's not a sort of cynical or humorous take. He's just repurposing found materials. When you say garbage, you're not talking banana peels.
No, I'm talking litter. Maybe that's a better word for it. And John was an environmental activist as well. And so I think it's really, he was an activist of all sorts. He was big and ACT UP back in the day. He passionately cared about the world. And so I think making art out of found materials was another level of statement. But as you say, there's nothing ironic about these pieces. They're beautiful. They're lush and beautiful. And one of the things I see in this, when I look at it closely, is that somebody had thrown out a huge ream of like copy paper, like in bright colors, in vivid like 1980s pinks and yellows. And you don't typically see Emily Dickinson in those kind of colors, right? Like that sepia toned portrait of her. It lives in those tones for us, but he just made her so vivid. And I think that's what, it's one thing to see David Bowie in those colors. It's another thing to see Emily Dickinson in those colors.
He was born in neon, but yeah.
He was born in neon, exactly.
Emily Dickinson was born in black and white. And yeah, I love that because it also hints at the sort of incredible internal complexity of her creative, this creative spirit who famously never, left her own home, her childhood home, the last years of her life. I think of her sort of in contrast to you, Liz, who has spent so much of your life traveling out there. You are also a person who you can basically talk to anyone and befriend anyone when you enter a room. And I think that's been a real key to your success as a writer, because not only have you been exposed to so many different types of people, you're very good at sort of recreating them, taking the litter of your travels and putting them back on paper, piecing them back together on paper.
What a nice thing to say. Thanks, honey. I'm just taking that in. I have a friend who says when people say nice things about you, rub it in like lotion. Like don't push it away, right? We're like so I'm just rubbing that in. And I'm touched by that. Yeah, Emily and I have we cannot live more diametrically opposed lives, except for how much we both love the world, and I think that's what comes through in her poetry and her love of the world was so vivid that she didn't even have to go outside to love it. There's a quote that I love of all people, Kafka, who we don't think of as being a sort of cheerful
optimist,
but he had this quote that said, you don't have to do anything, you don't even have to leave the room, just sit there and the world will roll in ecstasy at your feet. It cannot help itself, it has no choice. And I think Emily Dickinson lived that. Like, she was the vivid example of, like, you don't even have to leave your childhood home. And you can just sit there and watch the world roll in ecstasy at your feet because it has no choice. And you can celebrate that and love that and bear witness to that. So I kind of I'm the person who went out and rolled in the world. I feel like that's what I'm always doing. I have to go out and roll around in it. But she just sat there and watched it roll. Part of the reason I love that piece of art so much and her example is I do have a part of me that wishes I was Emily Dickinson and that I could just stay home. It's overwhelmed by the other parts of me that want to go and roll around in the world. But believe me, I have a part that's like, how wonderful would it be to never go anywhere?
Liz, one of the things that I really admire about you, because I'm a total opposite, is that you have been able to shed your physical belongings and kind of move on and be present in where you are. But have you, over the course of your many travels, like picked up talismans or keepsakes or anything physical that has stayed with you up until today?
I've got things that I brought home and keep in my home, but I always wanted to have like a Tibetan travel altar or something. Like, I love when people bring a little altar with them, and there's some beautiful medieval, like Florentine ones too, that are like tiny little triptychs that people would open up, and they would, wherever they were in their travels. I'm sort of too disorderly a traveler to actually have one. I have some alter ego who does have that, but it's not who I actually am. My closest thing to that is that I have these no, actually have it in front of me because I seldom don't. But Leuchtturm is this German company that makes journals. And these things are as close to my like holy relics as anything. And I buy them in lots of different colors. I always have one going. My whole spiritual practice is based inside of these, in these sort of prayers that I kind of download and live my life by. I write poetry in them. I decorate them. Each time I make a new one, I decorate it. They last for about 6 weeks, and they're full of drawings and like art. And a lot of the art that was in these ended up in the book All the Way to the River. And so I always have these. And then they live in a storage facility somewhere in New Jersey when I'm done. But that's my if I've got this and some colored pens, then I can go anywhere.
Amazing.
Great answer. Love it. And I love that you also could show and tell.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because it's never out of my reach. It's like never out of my reach.
It's a very cool and unusual thing to be talking to you in this sort of present chapter of having a place that you've settled in, surrounded by objects. The title of the podcast is Objects of Desire, that you've now had for a while. Like, how is this chapter feeling? Like, just, with regard to you, it seems like you've got roots, you've got a place that kind of holds you and keeps you when you are here. Like, how does this feel? Like, is it different or new in any way post-pandemic now that you don't have to stay home, but you have one that's been yours for a while?
This place is what I mean when I say I'm going home. I can stay in lots of places, and I can stay in lots of places for a really long time. I was just in Central America for almost 3 months. I'm at home a lot of places in the world, but when I say I'm going home, or when I feel a longing for home, when I get overexhausted and I'm like, this has been fun and wild, but like, I really need to go home. This is what I mean. And it's really miraculous for me that I've managed through all my ups and downs and upheavals. And I have not had a life that's been simple. I haven't had a life that's been like that serene. I've had a life that's been pretty exciting, and I've lost a lot and let go of a lot in order to have that life. To the fact that for some reason I get to still have this church that I bought on Craigslist over the internet without seeing it, from an internet cafe in Laos. And I sent some friends of mine up from Philadelphia to be like, can you go look at this place that I just put a deposit on? I feel
No
like it's supposed to
kidding.
be mine. And the first time I ever saw it was the first night I ever slept in it. And it is mine for now. I was just traveling and I came home, and my friend brings in my mail, my neighbor brings in my mail, and there was this packet that said, just had a note unsigned that said, I used to go to Sunday school in your church and I thought you might want these. And it was programs from the church service of this church from 1944.
Wow.
And the business accounts of the church from the 1950s, and then a newspaper article from 1988 about somebody I'd never heard of who did the initial renovations, turning this into a home. And it really brought home to me again, like, this is my home, but this church is going to live longer than me. And it's been here since 1794, and I'm its loving steward. I don't know who it will end up with, but I feel like I love the church and it loves me, and I take really good care of it because in honor of all the other people who gave shelter to over the centuries, and I want to hand it off in good shape.
Looks like you're doing a pretty good job of that. But you just say the words, I live in a church, with the tall ceilings and windows on all sides. I mean, I think 90% of the people who are listening to these words right now are thinking, that is the dream. Like, I just would love to live in a converted church. I mean, I think there's a sense of nostalgia and solidity. And I mean, it is your home. I think you've lived there in many different phases of your life. You've been many different people, and yet the home has remained, solid around you throughout those 2 decades.
It's the rock of ages. I mean, that's what a church is, right?
Yeah.
These are trying times. I recently got a generator. I'm one of the only people in this very rural and not well-off area of New Jersey where I live who has one. So all my neighbors have keys. And like, when I'm not here and I hear that storms are coming, I just send a text to everybody saying, like, you know where the keys are. The church will receive you. There's a huge pile of firewood. And, you've got babies and pets. And if you're cold, like, you come in. I went up in the attic. The attic isn't a usable attic, but it's where like the AC is and various things. And I've been up there a few times. And the beams of this thing look like beams of a ship. It is like first growth wood. And each beam is marked with Roman numerals because they actually picked this church up and moved it once about 20 years after it was built, and put it together again because they too knew how to salvage, use what was there. Like, they were building a bigger church in one place, and this village needed a church, and so they recycled it.
Sent it there.
And I love
You're
that.
in a collage. You live in a collage.
I live in I live in a collage, exactly. So, I mean, it's not old in terms of like European ages but for America,
Yeah.
1794 is a pretty old building.
It's not nothing. Do you feel it? Do you feel like, I don't know. I'm out of San Francisco, so the oldest thing we have is sort of like late 19th century, and even
Yeah.
still, you can feel spirits. You can feel like ghosts, not even in the negative way, right? Do you feel that you live like when it's quiet? Do you observe anything or feel anything?
I feel an embrace. When I first came here, it was the middle of January. I didn't know where it was. This was like before GPS. I didn't know what I had just done buying this place. I just knew that I had to. And I've done a lot of really impulsive things in my life that didn't turn out this well. I just want to say that. But like this, I generally, like, I'm trying as I get older to be less like this. But because of
It's very bad though when you get rewarded for your bad
I
behavior
know,
in such a way.
50%
You
of
need a
the
little-
time, it's really great. It's like, well, it could be great. Like it could be the church or it could be a horrific divorce, these acts of impulse. We don't know. The Buddhists say that, the reason karma is so complicated is that every action has a reaction and you never know what those reactions are going to be. And when you think about it too much, it makes your brain become overwhelmed kind of with terror and you're tempted to do nothing, yet you still must act. So anyway, I took the action and I bought this place and I came here in the middle of January and there was no furniture in it and my furniture hadn't arrived yet. And I had a sleeping bag and a mattress pad. And I was sleeping in this empty church in a place I didn't know on a sleeping bag and a mattress pad. And it occurred to me, this could be really haunted. And, or just objectively spooky. It's an empty church. And I got up out of my sleeping bag and I walked around and I touched all that I could touch and I just introduced myself and I said, my name is Liz and I'm the latest steward of this building. And I know I'm not the first person who loved this place or lived here. I don't know any of the history. Whoever's here, I respect that you were here first. I want to I just want to take care of this place and I'm going to be really tender and loving with it. I have great respect for all of you. My only request is please don't scare me. Just please don't scare me because I'm very easily scared.
Yeah.
So we can all live together, but please don't scare me. And they've never scared me. They've just held me.
Yeah.
Love good practical advice on this podcast that
Yeah.
we're getting for anyone who moves into an old house. The first thing to do, talk to the walls and the people.
This is a real thing. Like,
No, I totally
absolutely.
believe it.
There's
Yeah.
bad hauntings too. I mean, I'll withhold my story about my haunted dresser, but objects can have
I
spirits
believe
in them too.
it.
Yeah.
I believe it. I had another house that I couldn't even go into the attic because I was so freaked out by it. But there's nothing bad in this place.
That's so great.
To learn more about our guests, their objects, and First Stubes, a leading online marketplace connecting design lovers with sellers and makers from around the world, please head to the description for links. I knew you long before Eat, Pray, Love was published and the phenomenal, transformative event in your life and literary work and more than that to so many people. But in many respects, that's when you were sort of born as a writer to so many people. And it's hard now for me to believe that decades have gone by since you wrote it. So sort of when you look back at Eat, Pray, Love now, new people discovering it, or when you look at it yourself, do you think of it differently? And do you think new audiences are thinking of it differently than the original audience?
I think of it differently all the time because I change and grow and evolve. My beloved friend, the writer and teacher Rob Bell, when people ask him about things in the past, sometimes he's like, "Oh, that was like 8 Robs ago." Like we all change. We're so dynamic, and we all change so much in our lives. So that book was many Liz's ago, but I mean, I'll always be grateful to that book. It's enabled me to write The Signature of All Things. It's enabled me to be an independent, self-supporting artist for the last 20 years. It's incredible as a woman to have that kind of freedom. It's also inspired so many other women to get out of situations, to leave marriages, to quit jobs, to go traveling, to make art. It has that legacy continuously. But I'm going to share a story I just heard yesterday. So I did an interview with CNN yesterday about the 20th anniversary of Eat, Pray, Love that's coming up. And the woman interviewing me told me this story. She was in Thailand and she met a young woman who was traveling and said, "What are you doing?" And the young woman said, I'm having my Eat, Pray, Love," which is very common. This is something I hear all the time. People, when I meet women traveling, they're like, "I'm on my Eat, Pray, Love journey right now," or "I had my Eat, Pray, Love." Like it's like a sabbatical. It's almost like become a ritual in a woman's life that if she can, she takes her Eat, Pray, Love. And we all know what that means. Like it means a woman choosing to go be alone by herself, traveling and having an adventure. So the CNN reporter who was interviewing me said, she said to this young woman, "Oh, but in the book, she didn't go to Thailand, right? You know that she went to Bali." And the young woman said, "What book?" And that is the most wildly exciting thing I have heard in so long. Eat, Pray, Love now means something that has nothing to do with the book, that still has everything to do with the book, and that it's about a woman traveling. But like people have forgotten its original source, and now it just means I'm traveling by myself.
It's just in the zeitgeist.
I love that so much. I found that was so incredibly exciting and delightful.
But as a follow-up to that, and that is such a good story, but as a follow-up, how irritated are you or amazed to see how many permutations of it still exist in advertising copy and on everywhere you turn still?
It
3
makes
words.
me laugh. I know it's eat blank blank. I have my lecture agent Miriam has a file folder of photos that she's collected over the last 20 years of those all over the world. She sends them to me every time. I think it's great. You can't trademark a title. So even though there are people who are like, "You're so dumb." Like I never marketed anything around that. I never made like Eat, Pray, Love stationery or Eat, Pray, Love backpacks for traveling or Eat, Pray, Love water bottles. Like I've never
Power bars.
Eat, Pray, Love power. There's so many things I could have done and I didn't. And I don't really care because I just think, great, like let everyone have it. First, that book, kind of like this church that I live in, is meant for everybody. That book really is meant for everybody. So whatever anybody wants to do with it, they can do with it.
Oh, also as a writer, how great. I mean, you've toiled away 1,000-page books. Like 3 words did it. 3 words. That's all it takes.
That's all it took. And for somebody who likes to talk a lot, it's a nice reminder that sometimes less is more.
Right, yeah. Brings us back to Emily too. Emily worked in a very confined
spaces,
template.
physically and emotionally and creatively.
I want to go back to the portrait behind you and sort of the idea of portraiture as an art form. You have written incredible fiction. Beautiful Signature of All Things, I think, is my favorite book of all times. Even if I didn't know its author, I would say it's a brilliant, obviously your short stories are exquisite. Pilgrims, your first collection that came out of that Esquire story. But you're better known as a memoirist, and I would say, now with All the Way to the River, what would you say, a biographer in a way? I mean, it's a memoir, but it's also a very beautiful, complicated portrait of Rhea. Do you want to talk about sort of the art form of portraiture?
Okay, in one way it's easier, and in one way it's harder. And it's easier because all you have to do, really, if you're being honest, is just say what happened. Mm-hmm. That's also why it's harder, because how do you say what happened? Fairly, honestly, lovingly, accounting for the fact that other people may have seen and experienced it completely differently than you, accounting for the vagaries of memory. It's hard. And then there's the ethical questions are huge. And with fiction, I never feel like I'm struggling with ethical questions. And that's part of the great release and joy for me of writing fiction, is like, I can run wild in fiction. With The Signature of All Things, my feeling was like, as long as it's historically plausible, it doesn't have to be historically it doesn't have to be true. It's not a, it's not a true story. It's not about a real person, but I had a bunch of people read it who know history, and I was like, could this have happened? Like that's all you have to do with fiction is make it plausible. But with nonfiction, here's where it's complex. It's like, I can't think of anything I won't reveal about myself. And I say that as somebody who is now in 12-step recovery. I don't see any reason. I did an interview with Mike Birbiglia once, and we were talking about this and talking about how much we reveal about ourselves. And he was like, yeah, what are you holding on to it for? And I just thought that was such a great line. Like, what are any of us holding on to it for? Like, and the more I reveal myself, the more I hear a chorus of people saying like, oh yes, I also have those feelings, or I also have had that experience. But revealing another person is really tricky. So like I wrote this biography years ago, this book called The Last American Man, about this woodsman named Eustace Conway. And like, he was alive. And so I was able to give him the book before it went to publication. But, I was like, I'm not going to change a lot of this, Eustace, unless there's things in here that you can show me are factually incorrect. But like, the deal was I'm making a portrait of you and it's my vision of you. And he accepted that and he gave me the freedom to do that. Rhea also did that before she died. We knew as she was dying that I was going to be writing about her. I was writing about her as she was dying. I was taking notes all the time. We talked about what the title of the book could be. And she loved to be revealed. She'd written her own memoir. She had a documentary film crew following her around while she was dying. Like, she was somebody who found a lot of healing in transparency.
And yet,
so I felt actually pretty comfortable about writing about her. But there are other people, there are family members who may not want that story told about their family member. There are friends who may see her differently than I saw her. There were people, like, it's so complicated. And I'm so careful when I write to not reveal anybody but myself and who I have permission to reveal. And I had permission to reveal Rhea, and I have permission to reveal myself. But like, memoir is so tricky because there's stories I can't tell in that book because they involve people who, for whatever reason, I don't feel comfortable sharing that, or they don't feel comfortable being shared. Yeah, so it's heavy. I find portraiture heavy, like a heavy assignment. It's not as joyful as writing fiction. And yet it does often feel like a kind of cosmic assignment. Like writing this book about Rhea felt like it was an assignment that I couldn't duck, that I had to do. And it was very hard. And it was hard to bring it out into the world. And it's been hard having it out in the world. It's also the truest portrait that I could create of the person I loved more than anything.
Yeah, no, it's lovely, and you are actually fairly explicit in the text itself about the battles you're sort of fighting internally, about being brutally honest, but still portraying Rhea in all her glory and beauty too, as you're saying some pretty dark things about her. We all are, contain multitudes, right? So to show it. But I think about, like the painter the portraitist who has to, is working to create what they see as a true likeness of the person, but also mindful that they also want it to be sympathetic, I guess, not necessarily flattering, but at least sympathetic. And I could think that when you're doing that for someone whom you love, that the inner turmoil must be so intense.
Oh my God. Yeah. Listen, I'm obviously a very spiritual person. We've talked about me walking around an old house and talking to the walls and the ghosts, and anybody who knows my work knows that my spirituality is a really important part of my life. I also talk to Rhea, and she talks to me. She commanded me not to be a fucking pussy, which was very Rhea words, and to write the living fuck out of this book. Write the living fuck out of this book and don't be a fucking coward and tell the truth. Tell the truth about what addiction looks like. Tell the truth about your addiction. Tell the truth about my addiction. And people are just going to have to deal with it. And that's a very Rhea position to take. She did that throughout her life. And that's what I fell in love with in her, was that ferocious honesty. I'm not as good as she was. Although I think about it now, I think people's opinions meant a lot more to her than she let on. I think she had a very tough exterior and a marshmallow center. I don't think any of us like being criticized. I think even people who pretend that they don't care, deeply care, it's hard to let yourself be that seen. And yet I had to. And actually, I met when I was in Detroit on the book tour, which is where Rhea was from. So that was a loaded thing to go back there and bring this book there. One of the people in the audience was the psychic medium who I went to after Rhea died, who I write about in the book, and who downloaded Rhea in this amazing way shortly after Rhea died. And she came backstage to see me, and I was like, is Rhea mad at me? Is Rhea mad at me that I wrote this book? And she's like, no, she loves it. She's like, she loves it because she loves that you are forcefully telling your own truth and that you're doing it even against whether people are going to like you for it or not. And she goes, Rhea just now said to me, fucking finally, and she even like downloaded her voice, but she was like, fucking finally, Liz is like pushing back against trying to do things that are going to make people like her. Like, fucking finally. So that was a wonderful little endorsement to get from beyond the grave.
That's amazing.
I mean, every creative person struggles with that. You do it. You said you had to write this. I'm not going to ask the obvious question of why you had to write it. This is what you are. You are placed on this earth to tell the stories and maybe exercise personal demons or whatever it was for this particular book. But it's the same with what you do in design. You need to sort of beautify. You need to go in and organize, codify.
Yeah, significantly less vulnerable of a job to do interior design for people's homes. But yeah, there's.
I doubt it. Actually, I bet.
Really.
I bet it's really
public,
vulnerable,
maybe.
And I bet it's really scary, and I bet it requires enormous sensitivity, and I bet you get your feelings hurt a lot, and I bet you have to compromise in ways you don't want to, and I bet it's really vulnerable.
Huh, that's very kind. Thank you.
Especially because designers have to self-promote on social media, and those commentaries can be brutal.
With anything that you make, it's hard to be seen.
Yeah. Well, it's funny actually when you say this, because generally speaking, like I do like fairly provocative interiors once in a while that people will like and love, or they absolutely hate it. And I've gotten fairly comfortable with the fact that memorable, differentiated things are more polarizing than things that are fairly safe and easy. But during the pandemic, I was home a lot. And I have a different home that we mostly stayed in that was in the woods, and that was kind of where we did our walks, and it was lovely. And we'd come back to San Francisco, and one of the ways that I was coping with missing the city was I would do these little videos where I would tour people around on camera. And I did one, and out of nowhere, a former client whose home I did when he was married, and then I helped him into his new apartment after his divorce and helped him settle in and feel like these were all his choices this time. Out of nowhere, he sent me a DM in response to it, and he goes, "Your home stresses me the fuck out. I could never live there." And I was so stunned. Like, no one, certainly not anyone who personally knows me, who has paid me, commissioned me to create residential portraits of 2 chapters of his life. Like, certainly not this guy is going to hate my work. That's actually for me. Like, this is my personal home. And that kind of sat with me in a different way. Yeah. Anybody else who's never been in my home or seen my work in that level of intimacy, if they criticize my home, I'd be like, well, thank you for the comment. It helps my algorithm. But that one was wild.
I guarantee that anybody who has ever put anything out in the world can remember and will remember till their last dying breath the worst thing anybody has ever said about them, or the most hurtful thing that anybody has ever said about them. It goes in and it doesn't come out, and there's a Guardian article about me that I can quote chapter and verse. I read it once, like 15 years ago, and it's like, wow, that's gonna live there forever.
Yeah. And all the praise in the world just sort of recedes into the background.
Yeah, Brene Brown told me once, and she's probably said it publicly, but she said it to me once in a conversation about how, she said she used to do this, and she knows a lot of people who have done this, where, you post something, or especially now in the world where you can put everything out where the whole literal world can look at it. And she said, there's this thing we do as humans where we scroll. We literally flip through and don't look at the praise and the kind things and the loving things and the friendly things. She said, I noticed that what I would do is I would scroll until I found the thing that somebody said that confirms my absolute worst fear about myself. And I would zero in on that and then take that in and then use that as a knife to cut myself with. I've heard it described as digital cutting, right? You're gonna look until you find the thing that you can hurt yourself with. And knowing how harmful that can be and how vulnerable we have to remain in order to create, I'm so careful and protected about what I look at. And I, especially with All the Way to the River, I told my publishers, like, I don't even want to see the good reviews. So I haven't read a single review of the book. And I said, it's just as confusing to see the good ones as it is to see. I don't want to hear anybody's opinions about this book. I gave it in manuscript to all the people who are spoken about in the book, and those are the opinions that I cared about, and to the people who I show my work to early on, and to my editors. But like beyond that, like I'm not taking no notes. Like I'm not taking any notes on this. And yet you can't help but see things. Like a month after the book came out, I was just randomly scrolling through Instagram, and I saw this headline come up. I don't know what even media source it was from, but it just said in huge print, like, Elizabeth Gilbert cannot control the narrative with like a bunch of exclamation points. And I just like threw my phone. I'm like, ah! I wasn't even looking. Like, I don't want to see. And I'm like, what did it say about what I can't control the narrative? What are people saying? And then now, a couple months later, I think that's one of the wisest things anybody has ever said about me, because it is in fact true that Elizabeth Gilbert cannot control the narrative.
Nor can any of us.
And yet still we must create, and still we must take action, not knowing what the reaction will be. And that just takes a lot of courage and a lot of tenderness to do.
Well, thank you for your courage and tenderness. We've talked a lot about your physical surroundings. When you're writing, creating, whether memoir or fiction, how much does sort of the physical world play in your storytelling? I think of you as such a brilliant dialoguist, and you're incredible at sort of doing portraits of people. So how important is sort of setting the scene?
For fiction, it's so important, and that's why I can't live an Emily Dickinson life, is because I research my fiction as hard or harder than I research my nonfiction. Like, for instance, let's talk about The Signature of All Things, because you love it and I love it too. It's my favorite one of my books too.
Well, we went down to Philadelphia. There was the book is set in the 18th century, in Philadelphia, and there's a historic house down there that you actually used as the model of the setting of your main character's life. The house still stands, but this property was sold off to a cemetery, and so talk about ghosts in an old house, or at least surrounding the old house. It literally is plunked down in the middle. The tombstones come almost up to the foundations of the house.
I work with your friend of mine, Margaret Cordy, who we've been friends with for 30 years, and who used to work at Harper's, and she does a lot of research help for me, and she found that place. I was like, I need to go walk around inside of an 18th century Philadelphia manor house so that I can figure out what the rooms feel like. I need to figure out where the light hits. I need to be on the stairs. I need to see the basement. And because there's only so much research you can do reading. And I do a ton of research reading, but you have to go be in the object of the home. And that home, for the first half or 3/4 of that novel, is a character in the book. But I also went to Kew Gardens in London, and they took out Darwin's notes, and I got to read Darwin's notes and Alfred Russel Wallace's letters to Darwin and see them by hand. So all of these materials that became such an important part of the story, I literally traveled the world to touch. I went to Tahiti to see where Cook's men had landed so that I could write about the colonization of Tahiti. And I had read everything I thought there was to read in the world about Cook's landing at this particular beach in Tahiti. But it wasn't until I got there that I found out that the sand was black. Like, no one had mentioned that. And I wouldn't have known that. And it was important to the book to know that. And it was important to the book to know about the crabs who live there, who scuttle about all the time. And that became, like, these details are so, like, the objects of the world are essential for a novelist to know about.
You do a beautiful job of capturing them. And I now need to go back and reread the book. It's reminding me of all the pleasures that unfolded in that. I loved that book. Another thing that I have been thinking about in preparation for speaking with you today is this sort of, the title of your latest book, because I am a person who organizes my life or my memories through place. I can't necessarily remember the details, the face, the name of the person, but I remember precisely where it occurred. And I love your title and sort of the metaphor of using like a spatial metaphor, I think, a geographical metaphor for this idea of friendship or love. Do you want to sort of talk about that?
Yeah, I would love to. So, all the way to the river was an expression that Rhea used based on a concept that she created. For those who don't know, Rhea was my best friend for many years, and then we very slowly fell in love with each other and kept that hidden from even ourselves very successfully for a long time until she was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic and liver cancer and given 6 months to live, at which point I could no longer, it was impossible for me anymore to deny the true feelings that I had for her. And the book is about our long friendship and then our very short and very beautiful and very traumatic love story. So all the way to the river was something that she used to say because she was a Lower East Side girl. She was born in Syria. I always say born in Syria, raised in Detroit, forged on the Lower East Side. She came to the Lower East Side in the 1980s already with a serious drug and alcohol abuse problem as a musician in training and hairdresser. And she was a punk. And she viewed the world through the map of Manhattan, of Lower Manhattan, and she viewed her relationships that way. And so she used to say, like, you've got your Fifth Avenue friends, and your Fifth Avenue friends are the ones who are sort of, you're just surface with them. Everyone is just presenting a surface version of themselves. Nobody really wants to be known. It's all just your mask and their mask. And then as you head farther east, as she defined friendships, the more easterly friendships became more honest. So you're like Fourth and Third Avenue friends. You were people like maybe colleagues that you work with who get to know you a little bit better, or neighbors that you've had for years who get to know you a little bit better. And then you get to like your Second and First Avenue friends. And those are people that you went to school with, and like people whose weddings you went to, and people whose parents' funerals you go to. And then she's like, but it's not till you get to Alphabet City where you're like, your Alphabet City friends, your avenues like A, B, C, and D friends are the people who know you. Like they know you, they know your frailties, they know your addictions, they paid your bail, they've seen you at your worst, they know your darkness, they know your shadow side, like they held your head while you were throwing up, they know about the abuse, they know about the like everything, the affair, they know there's nothing left to hide from them. And they're the people you call in the middle of the night when you don't know where else to turn. And then she's like, but if you're very lucky, you might once in your life have what she called your all the way to the river friend. And that's the person from whom there are no more secrets, who can read your face from 50 yards, who can sense from a city away that something's wrong. And she used to say to me, you're my all the way to the river friend. And I was, and I proudly was. And it was a badge of honor for me to be that. But having gone, and then when she got sick and knew she was dying, she started calling her death the river. And she would say, I just want you to walk with me all the way to the river. And I promised her I would, and I did. But as I say in the book, anybody who's ever walked from Fifth Avenue to the East River on the Lower East Side knows it's not always a very nice walk. And you'll see, like it starts off nice, and and ultimately once you get to the river and you can see the sunrise, it's nice, but like you're going to pass through some really difficult times and places, and that's what that memoir is about. Is what intimacy at that level brings, and the dangers and the perils of intimacy at that level, as well as the beauty.
I love that. I love the way the title was a gift to you.
Yeah,
it really was.
So evocative. And as someone who loves the New York City grid and loves New York, I love to hear it used in such a profoundly revealing way, to illuminate something else your love and friendship. There are so many layers of why we respond to certain objects, things, happy childhoods, unhappy childhoods, escaping home, returning home. I feel like it's endlessly fascinating. And your portrait of Emily Dickinson behind you, you're sort of the good angel on your left shoulder.
I know, isn't that wonderful?
That's
I felt like
right?
that
Yeah.
too. I'm like, speaking of spirits, like, look who's in the room with us. I mean, that's a high grade spirit. Emily Dickinson in the house.
Emily Dickinson is in the house. Okay, Liz, so we're asking everybody. The podcast is called Objects of Desire. So why do you think we desire objects, things? Why do we need them in our lives?
We desire, period, whether it's an object or a person or power or a feeling, because we cannot help ourselves. That's the definition of desire. It's the thing you cannot help. And that is our great beauty as humans, and it can be our great downfall. We are overcome. Something makes us feel overcome. We have to, like we have to have it. My favorite definition of art is making something more beautiful than it needs to be. I think that that's our shared common human inheritance. I grew up, my heritage on my mother's side are like the least frivolous people who ever lived, like Scandinavian dairy farmers, Dust Bowl, really hard Scrabble lives. And like Lutherans, like really hard Scrabble lives. These are not people who would have called themselves artists, who would have thought that that was a reasonable thing to be. And yet all of them made art. My grandmother's quilts are so beautiful. And they're pragmatic. Like my friend John Morse, she was making things out of garbage. She was poor and she made quilts because she needed to put things on all her children so that they would stay warm. But they didn't have to be as beautiful as they were. Like they did not have to be as beautiful as they were. They are astonishingly beautiful. They look like Hilma A.F. Klimt work. Like they're just deeply, deeply, deeply beautiful. And my grandfather, her husband, made his own tools because that was easier than cheaper than buying them. But they didn't have to have that little filigree in the middle on the handle, like that are so beautiful that his great grandchildren want them as objects. Like they couldn't help it. Like they couldn't help it for all their like bleak Scandinavian Lutheran Depression era Dust Bowl worldview. They could not help wanting beauty around themselves. And that's why we desire objects. And if we can't buy them, then we have to make them. And that's just the way we are.
Perfect answer. There is no wrong answer, but there are a lot of perfect answers. So thank you for giving us one right here, right now. Well, Liz, this has been such a treat to have you here. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about somebody who I loved so much, my friend John Morse. I feel like I, in a way, got to eulogize him in this podcast, and that feels really dear to my heart. And it just makes me love this piece of work even more because now that energy is in there too. So, so thank you. And Tony, I'll never stop saying thank you for giving me my career.
Oh my gosh! So I was very lucky to have had as we called it, a slush pile under my desk that we were all, as young editorial assistants, tasked with basically processing. And you were the well, what did you say? There's always a room of 10 people. One person will be from New Jersey. I believe, like in a slush pile of 300 manila envelopes, there will be one Liz Gilbert waiting for the world to hear what she has to say. And if I hadn't lucked upon it, somebody else would have. So I'm humbled by this idea that I launched your career, because you were going to launch whether or not I sort of somehow got in the way or not. So it's been a delight to watch your journey.
You, honey. I rub that in, take that and rub it in, because you did more than just find that story. You nursemaided me through it, and then you found me my literary agent, who is still 30 years later my literary agent. I'm so happy it was you. I'm so happy that the person who plucked me out of the bar and to New York, the New York literary world was you, Tony, and that we've been able to be friends forever since. And
I too had no idea where it would lead when you entered my life. So
I mean, Liz, we have that in common because I've never hosted a podcast. Tony was like, do you want to do this with me? So what if this is my moment?
He's got good taste.
What if this is my Esquire moment?
He sees the diamond. He sees the diamond shining out there, and he's like, I'm going to pluck this diamond. So yeah, I give you both blessings on this endeavor, and I'm so happy to be part of it. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about a person and a piece of art that I love very dearly.